Glad to be here. I am going to be sharing from Matthew 5 again, continuing the series in the Sermon on the Mount. In the first installment of that, we looked at the what we call the Beatitudes, and there we noticed some of those blessed are the, and then it fills in those who mourn, the meek, those who hunger and thirst. Some of those statements, they're talking about what we choose. Some of those statements, we're talking about what we don't choose, the state that we find ourselves in. And many of Jesus' proclamations here probably sounded contrary to human intuition. It does a little bit to me for some of these things. How can you be blessed when you're experiencing these challenging circumstances? But Jesus isn't just being provocative. He's revealing reality. He's revealing key truths about the way things are, at least the way things are in light of the kingdom that he is introducing, that he is bringing to earth through his teaching and then through his act of suffering, his death and resurrection. So he's talking about the way things are. And this section we'll be looking at this morning, Matthew 5, mostly verses 13 to 16. Some of his statements here in some ways feel a little less provocative or a little less astounding than the Beatitudes. He is continuing to describe reality, again, reality in a new sense, in this new kingdom that he is introducing. And probably in that sense, some of what he has to say in our passage today also is going to make some of the hearers uncomfortable. So to some of them, it may sound good and affirming, and to some, it may make them uncomfortable. He uses two metaphors, the salt and light. They're, I think, in many ways, parallel metaphors. In that he's trying to say basically the same thing with both of them. Maybe you could nuance them out a little differently, but two parallel metaphors to describe realities of this kingdom. And he wanted his audience to understand, he wants us to understand, and giving this to us today also, the role that they had, the role that we have in the world. The salt and light metaphors are interesting. The salt, both salt and light are essential for human flourishing. I'm going to say human flourishing. I'm not going to say they're essential. I don't know that salt is essential to survive as a person, but to flourish it is, and light probably essential to survive even in the physical sense. So they're two interesting metaphors. And also we'll see as we go through this that these metaphors point to God's covenant with his people, both the old and the new covenant. So he's actually using language not just at work as a metaphor for human flourishing, but also to draw from covenant language. And I think that maybe made more sense to his hearers than it does to us today. But we'll look at a couple examples of how that is true, how salt and light draw from the old covenant that was already in place at the time of Jesus' message. And of course, now we've joined into that covenantal stream, that covenantal family. Even though we're Gentiles, we're grafted in, so to speak, into God's covenant. Let's read Matthew 5:13 to 16. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So let's try to unpack this. What did Jesus mean when he said, you are the salt of the earth? There's a lot of different places you could go with a metaphor like that. You are the salt of the earth. What does that mean? I'm going to try to just focus in on a couple aspects of it and not try to drill too deep into it. I think one of the maybe most helpful metaphorical understandings of salt of the earth is to think about salt as a preservative, the role it would have played in their society. A lot of it had to do with how it could preserve things. Food, probably leather, all sorts of things. They didn't have the refrigeration access that we have today, freezers and refrigerators. If we didn't have those, we'd be a lot more interested in things like how do we preserve our food through other ways. So I think that is one of the big things people would have thought about, salt as a preservative, how it keeps things from spoiling. And did I leave my book back there? I want to read an excerpt from David Berceau did a commentary published not too long ago on Matthew. At least I don't know if he's done the second half of Matthew yet. This is just on the first part. But in thinking about like how do we understand this metaphor, or how did the early church understand the metaphor, is sort of helpful for me to think about what is a reasonable way of understanding this "you are the salt of the earth" phrase. So here's a couple excerpts. And so basically what I'm reading here is David Berceau quoting a number of early Christian leaders, writers, and some of these names you may recognize if you're familiar with them, and others you may not. So this is David Berceau's saying this. When people in Jesus' time thought of salt, they mainly thought of it as a preservative. Philo writes, and now we're getting into early Christian writers. Philo writes, "Salt is an emblem of the duration of all things, for salt preserves everything upon which it is sprinkled." That's one quote. Origen, another author, writes, "Why are Jesus' disciples compared with salt? Salt preserves meats from decaying into stench and worms. It makes them edible for a longer period. Meat would not last very long and be found useful without salt. So also Christ's disciples, standing in the way of the stench that comes from the sins of idolatry and immorality, support and hold together this whole earthly realm." So that was, I guess, Origen's take on that. Another writer, Chrysostom, writes, "Jesus wants us to be salt, and this is the nature of salt. It not only preserves itself, but it also preserves all other objects with which it comes into contact." And then this is David Berceau saying, "Christians preserve the world of mankind." And then in the letter to Dionysius, so maybe we don't know who the author of that is. "The soul is imprisoned in the body, yet it preserves that very body." The soul preserves the body, I guess, is kind of how this author thought about it. "Likewise, Christians are confined in the world as a prison, and yet they are the preservers of the world." Kind of an interesting thought. Anyway, so these early these early Christian writers, thinkers, seemingly tended to sort of go in that direction as they thought about this metaphor. Also, I would say maybe secondarily, but also significant in terms of how we think about the application of this metaphor, is salt does other things. It enhances flavor. So it makes something better. You add it to something and it makes something better, which I think can also fit this metaphor. So it's also cleansing. It can help to cleanse wounds, to heal things. So I'm not going to say this is only about preservation. I think that's part of it, but the idea is that salt does something good for if it's used in a good application. So the salt of the earth is those who are the salt of the earth are bringing something good: preservation, enhancement, healing, cleansing. I think is the tenor of what Jesus is communicating here. Also, for those in Jesus' audience who were familiar with the Jewish scriptures, which was probably a lot of them, Jesus' reference here to being the salt of the earth may have kept in their minds with certain passages that referred to salt in relation to God's covenant with Israel. Salt is sort of a covenantal element, if you will, referenced in relation to covenant. I'll read some examples of that. In 2 Chronicles 13, 4-6, and this is the words of King Abijah, who was the king over Judah at that time. And He probably wasn't the best king ever, but at this point he was claiming to follow the Lord, and it reflected in his statements here. He says, "Hear me, O Jeroboam, the king of Israel, and all Israel. Ought you not to know that the Lord God of Israel gave the kingship over Israel forever to David and his sons by a covenant of salt? And now you think to withstand the kingdom of the Lord in the hands of the sons of David, because you are a great multitude and have with you the golden calves that Jeroboam made for you as gods." And he goes on to say that you have rejected God, we have not rejected God. We've been promised the kingdom by a covenant of salt. Leviticus 2:13 says, "You shall season all your grain offerings with salt. You shall not let the salt of the covenant with your God be missing from your grain offering. With all your offerings you shall offer salt." And if we read through Leviticus, we notice that, as referenced here, certain offerings, they were required to have salt with them. Numbers 18, verse 19, this is the Lord speaking to Aaron in his priest role. "All the holy contributions that the people of Israel present to the Lord, I give to you and to your sons and daughters with you as a perpetual or everlasting due. It is a covenant of salt forever before the Lord for you and for your offspring with you." So there the Lord uses the language covenant of salt. And it'd probably be an interesting sermon to unpack that, salt in the covenant, and trace that and unpack that more. But that's all the unpacking I'm going to do. I'm just pointing out that there is covenantal language linkages between this idea of salt and probably, as people are hearing, you are the salt of the earth. Well, salt is part of their covenantal understanding and plays a role in that. And so maybe some people were thinking of that as they thought about what is Jesus saying here about being the salt of the earth. And now if that is true, if I'm not making too much out of too little here, I think Jesus is in a sense then saying, you are the salt of the earth. You're the people who are gonna be my covenant people. As salt of the earth, you are the ones through which I'm going to bless the world as my covenant people. And we'll dig into that a little bit more in the light of the world metaphor. And also, it makes a little sense if we think about it in the term of covenantal language, what Jesus said next, or who he is even talking to. So if we remember this sermon, it's a little ambiguous, granted, but this sermon was given to his disciples, his followers, and there also seems to be a rather significant crowd that is gathered along with them. So I picture his closest apostles, his broader group of disciples, and then a broader group of interested seekers as the recipients of this sermon, although granted, we don't know exactly the scope of how many people were there or who they were exactly. But probably primarily Jews, probably a decent-sized group of people, and he's saying, you are the salt of the earth. And finally something that's starting to feel good, right? Like, thank you. Like, we know, we're the covenant people, we're the salt of the earth, is sort of how I picture them receiving that, if they made that connection. But then Jesus says something else that maybe made them less comfortable. And he said, but if the salt has lost its taste. And so what did Jesus mean by this phrase, if the salt has lost its taste? Or the NASB renders this as, if the salt has become tasteless. And this phrase, lost its taste or become tasteless, it is translating the Greek word moreino, let's say it's something like that, moreino, which is translated, according to Strong's dictionaries, is usually means, or is translated to become insipid. Now, we probably need a definition for that. Or to make or to act as a simpleton, to become a fool or make foolish, or to lose savor. Paul uses the word moreno in Romans 1:22 when he says, professing to be wise, they became moreno, or they became fools. So there's this aspect of not just it doesn't taste good, but it's become foolish, or it's completely lost its intended purpose. But it also, like, the classification as a fool was pretty serious, in this context. It's not just they're fooling around. Like, a fool is definitely not who you want to be, because they had the wisdom of Solomon and all that, and it really puts a hurting on the fools in terms of how it talks about them. So if the salt has become foolish is almost maybe the best understanding of it metaphorically. If the people who are supposed to be salt have become foolish, they become tasteless. Real salt actually can't lose its saltiness. I was like, I'm curious about this. So if the salt has lost it, so what could cause a salt to lose its saltiness? Turns out about nothing but chemical transformation can actually cause that to happen. So if it's not, like maybe some sorts of salts, if you burn them long enough, or that kind of thing, but maybe I'll get some feedback from the science teachers in here. But it takes a lot to have salt lose its savor. Generally speaking, you're looking at a chemical transformation. But Jesus, in his metaphor here, is saying that actually you can, and salt can lose, metaphorically speaking, can lose its saltiness. And I wonder if he's cluing in the covenant people here who say we are the children of Abraham. God has not rejected us. He might be telling them, you know what? This can happen. The salty people, can lose your savor. You can lose your covenantal status, at which point its usefulness is gone. It's not good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. Judgment, right? That's probably the way we should understand that, being trampled under people's feet. If the salt loses its savor, if it becomes foolish, it is good for nothing but to be cast out, or to be judged, or subjugated, or carried off into captivity, if we're maybe looking at some actual happenings in the nation of Israel. So Jesus is saying, these people, you who are the salt of the earth, who should be the salty ones, there is potential for you to lose that, to become foolish, and then the outcome is not what you're going to want it to be. And this warning applies for us today, because we are part of God's covenant people, not the only ones. Mennonites are not the only ones. Evangelical Christians, I don't know, are the only ones. Anyway, there's a broad strand of Christianity that are God's covenant people. Those who follow Christ in many different places of the world in different ways, who are seeking to follow Jesus, are God's covenant people. And therefore, we're the salt of the earth. But if we become moreno, if we lose our saltiness, then we'll become good for nothing but to be trampled under people's feet. Judgment. So it's a warning for them today. It's a warning for them back then. It's a warning for us today as well. That it is reassuring to be called the salt of the earth. It tells us that we have an important role to play in the world. It's also a warning that this is not a permanent status, and actually it's a little easier to lose our saltiness than it is for salt to lose its saltiness. You are the light of the world. So Jesus continues his teaching with a parallel metaphor, saying you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. And I think this idea of being light, at least for me, this idea of being light is something that intuitively makes a little more sense than the idea of being salty. because light is something that in so many ways we culturally attribute to something good. You know, in culture in general, like in movies, there's a light and the dark. You know, the good and the bad, or the good and the evil. There's this idea that light is the good. I mean, at least that historically has been the case. Maybe it's getting more muddled these days. I don't know. But this idea of being light makes sense to me. Light, it pushes back the darkness. It reveals things. It shows us things. It shows us where we can walk safely without stumbling or getting caught, our foot caught in a bear trap or whatever when we're walking through the woods. It's essential for human flourishing in a very real and physical sense, and also in you know, our spirit, our mind, our sanity. People who live in Alaska, for example, in the dark seasons, boy, they just really struggle because the lack of light just really wears on their mental sanity. So light is good. And often, in a spiritual metaphorical sense, is also a descriptor of spiritual flourishing or blessing. Isaiah 9:2, which is a messianic prophecy very clearly, says, "The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwell in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shone." And people in that day, in Jesus' day, they were looking for the Messiah. And they probably knew that phrase so well, or that verse so well. They've seen a great light. On them light has shone. They were looking for Messiah. They were looking for the light that he would bring. And now Jesus is saying, hey, you're the light of the world. And I wonder how they took that, if they made a connection there or not. Similar to the salt of the earth phrase, Jesus hears, at least those familiar with the Holy Scriptures, probably were making some mental connections here with Jesus' statement about them being the light of the world. Isaiah 9:2, which I just read. Another one is Isaiah 42:6-7, says, "I am the Lord, I have called you in righteousness. I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prison those who sit in darkness." And those particular verses especially are again, messianic. The broader chapter, I would think, probably best understood both as a messianic and a sort of broader covenantal language, like referring not only to the Messiah, but to the nation as bringing light to the world. I think it references Jerusalem, the holy city, and they're having a special status of light to the nations. Also consider God's words to Abraham when God communicated his intent to establish his covenant with Abraham way back at the beginning there, to make a covenant with Abraham and his descendants. And God told Abraham at least twice, I'm going to give two examples, that through him and his descendants all the nations would be blessed. So one is in Genesis 12, Genesis 12, 2-3. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you." So one of the initial calls here to Abram, "And I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you, make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." And another passage, Genesis 22, has some very similar language. And this was right after Abraham showed obedience to God by offering up his only son Isaac to the point of, almost killing him on the altar. And God says, "I will surely bless you. I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." There again, maybe a hint of messianic, but also certainly the covenantal language of you being a blessing. Or he could have probably just as well said light, but light equating with blessing here. So the nation of Israel knew, or at least they should have known, that part of their special covenantal status with God involved not just him blessing them, but them being blessed to be a blessing or to bring light, as Jesus is now saying here. You are the light of the world. And I think that fits well with how Jesus states the rest of this light metaphor. You're the light of the world, so speaking in a broad sense. A city set on a hill can't be hidden. People don't put light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand. It gives light to everyone that's in the house. Let your light shine before others. So don't hide your light is one thing that he's saying here. Because you're God's covenant people, you're blessed to be a blessing. You are the light of the world, but don't hide your light. With the salt metaphor, the call is a little bit more implied. He doesn't say be salty, although if we look at Mark 9 verse 50 says, have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. And just before that, he's talking about if the salt has lost its savor, it's not good for anything. And he says, have salt in yourselves. So in Mark 9, it's a little more explicit, like, I want you to be salty. And just like he's saying here in Matthew 5, I want your light to shine before others. So in summary, Jesus seems to be saying here with these two metaphors, you're the salty ones. Be salty. You're the light. You're the light of the world. Be the light. Don't hide your light. Share it with others. So what is the outcome then that Jesus speaks of being salty, of letting our light shine? And that is that others may see our good works and give glory to our Father who is in heaven. And I wonder how you feel about this phrase, good works, or maybe more specifically, the idea of being noticed for your good works. Does that make you uncomfortable? It says, Jesus is saying, let your light shine before others so they can see your good works. Don't hide it. Does that make you uncomfortable at all? I mean, doesn't Jesus say in Matthew 6:1, beware of practicing your righteousness before others? He says that. And he also says there, in order to be seen by them. So Matthew 6:1 doesn't mean hide your light. It just means don't show your light to receive praise from other people. There's another reason why we let our light shine, and that's what Jesus says in 5:16, so that they may see and give glory to our Father who is in heaven. And even the phrase good works has baggage for me. I don't know if it has baggage for you, but there's been theological debates, wars that have raged over the centuries about our good works are meaningless, and it's these other things that we should focus on, and no, it's good works are important, and so there's been. So it has baggage for me. I don't know if it has baggage for you, these words, good works. It's curious what the early Christian writers thought. And so here's just two short snippets. So Clement of Alexandria said this. And he was speaking, I think in reference specifically to Jesus' words here. Because a lot of what the early Christians wrote was actually kind of parsing out scriptures that we have today. He said, we ought to have works that cry aloud, that are fitting for those who walk in the day or in the light. And Tertullian wrote, "The things that make us lights of the world are these, our good works." So I get the sense that they're saying, let's not be ashamed of our good works. This is part of letting our light shine. And as I said, Jesus does not say, do your good works so others will think well of you. He warns us against that. But he is saying, let your light shine before others so that God is glorified. And so just to pull out of the metaphor for a second, I think what Jesus is saying is, live like I'm teaching you to live. And love like I'm teaching you to love. And the rest of the sermon here has a lot more of these teachings. And the life of Jesus has his example. And the rest of his teachings, as we find in the Gospels. So he's talking about this, and I'm referring to this in a broader sense. Jesus is telling his hearers, live like I'm teaching you to live. Love like I am teaching you to love. Obey my teachings. Follow my example. And these are the good works. When I get tangled up in these, at least in my mind, because I've tried to avoid it in actual speech more lately, getting tangled up in this good works conundrum. That helps me just to move away from good works and what are they, and are we supposed to be focusing on them? No, it's about following Christ, his teachings, his example. Those are the good works we're called to. That's being salt and light. And people will notice that because it's countercultural in a lot of ways. And they'll give glory to our Father who's in heaven. I want to just end with a snippet from the next few verses here, mainly just verse 17, introduce the concept there that Jesus is talking about, and it relates somewhat back to what we just looked at. It also points forward to especially the rest of chapter 5. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot, will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of these least commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Why did Jesus need to say this? Especially, don't think that I've come to abolish the law and the prophets. I've not come to abolish, but to fulfill. Why did he even feel the need to say this? Maybe he was getting accusations to that effect from the religious leaders. Maybe his teaching sounded so different to what was in the teaching marketplace at the time. Jesus wanted his hearers to know that he was building on a foundation, on a covenant, on a history that was already laid, but also that he had there was something important that he was doing. He was not just another teacher to explain the law in the way it had always been explained. He was doing something different. He was moving forward God's plan and desire in a significant way. And the Greek word that's translated as fulfill here, the end of verse 17, to fulfill them is plerou. It means to make replete, or to cram, like cram a net full of something, or to level up, to fill up a hole in the ground, or to furnish, or imbue, or influence, or satisfy, or to execute an office, which means fulfill it in a good way, to finish a period, or finish a task, to verify, to like verify a prediction that took place before, or to accomplish, to complete, to end, to expire, to fill up, to perfect. Like all those things is fair game when we're talking about this word plerou. The guys from the Bible Project, they render this word plerou as fill full. So they would say, I have not come to abolish the law or the prophets, but to fill them full. And I think that's a fair translation based on the Greek word used there. So how is Jesus filling full or fulfilling the law and the prophets? He's obviously the fulfillment of many prophecies and fulfilling them in that way. He also, as we can see in his teaching here, is going to bring the covenant as it was to a fuller and different state, not doing away with it, but filling it up in a way that it had never been filled up before. And calling people to a higher standard under this new covenant that he was explaining to them. So Jesus' teachings, in his Sermon on the Mount in particular, but also elsewhere, more clearly, more fully describe God's desires for his people, his covenant with them. He tells his hearers here, he tells us what it means to be salt, what it means to be light in this world. And I think his teachings are intended to form and to call a group of people who can fulfill God's intent for the law, for his covenant, through their redemption, through their reconciliation, through their obedience to Christ. Some of the early Christian writers had some things to say about this statement too. Irenaeus wrote, "Those things in the law that were given to the Israelites for servitude and as a sign uniquely to them," some of the sacrificial systems, I suppose, he, speaking of Jesus, brought to completion in the new covenant of liberty. But he has increased and widened those laws that are natural, noble, and common to all humans. Tertullian wrote that that Jesus was modifying the law, quote, by reformation, amplification, and progress. Although fruit is separated from the seed, the fruit comes from the seed. Likewise, the gospel is separated from the law, although it comes forth from the law. So a fruit metaphor. Chrysostom wrote that it was with regard to the future code of laws that he said he was about to deliver to them, or his teachings. For his sayings were not repealing the former ones, rather they were enlarging and filling up those former laws. So David Berceau would try to synthesize what these guys are saying by saying that the early Christian writers thought that by this statement that he was not abolishing but fulfilling, Jesus was doing two things. He was filling out the law, which included amplifying certain parts of it, and he was completing other parts of it, bringing those things to an end, presumably because their purpose had been fulfilled. Thinking particularly of some of the sacrificial systems and rites of cleanliness and things like that. And I think that Jesus' metaphors about salt and light is one example of him filling full the law and the prophets. He's telling his hearers that being salt and light is about more than being a Jew, being a child of Abraham. It's even about more than keeping the law of Moses. He's giving them a new vision for what it means to follow God and what it means to be part of God's covenant people. And he's going to speak a lot more about that in the coming verses. So in conclusion, in summary, we are God's covenant people. And we have been grafted into a story of covenant, of redemption that spans thousands of years. It's not just from Jesus onward. Our story starts back further than that. Now, Jesus made a dramatic shift in how we interact with God's covenant, but we're now part of that story as well. Jesus is the mediator of a new and better covenant, not one that abolished the old, but one that filled it full, fulfilled it, thereby more fully revealing God's heart for his people, drawing us into closer communion with God. As God's covenant people, we are the salt of the earth. We are the light of the world. Let's not lose our savor. Let's not lose our light. Let's not hide those things. What does it mean for you to be salt and light today? It's not equivalent to being Jewish or being Mennonite. Being Mennonite is not equal being salty and showing your light. There's nothing wrong with being Mennonite. I approve of that, but that's not what it's talking about per se. And the rest of Jesus' sermon has a lot to say about that. What does it mean to be salt and light? And so I think we need to take that very seriously. And it may be that God is calling you to something more specific even. So we can read his teachings, we can try to do as he says, But there's other things that God will call you to do or stop doing. Take up, lay down. Listen to what the voice of God is speaking to you in being salt and light. Invite the Holy Spirit to speak to you about how you can be salt and light that enhances, that flavors, that preserves, that heals, that shows the way, that people take notice, that they give glory to our Father who is in heaven. We bow our heads to pray. Father in heaven, I pray that as we consider the words of your Son Jesus and what he called people to so many years ago and what he still calls us to, Lord, that we would understand what it means to be salt and light and your covenant people in our world, our time, our situation today. Help us to see that, help us to understand it, give us the courage to do it, and may you be glorified, Lord, through our doing it. May you be glorified through our surrender, our commitment to following you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.